One single animation in a 1992 arcade cabinet changed the entire video game industry forever. It forced Congress to hold hearings, created the rating system that's still on every game you buy today, and turned a fighting game into a cultural earthquake. So today, we're breaking down the best Mortal Kombat fatalities ever made and everything that makes them legendary, starting with the one that started it all. Spine Rip is not just a fatality, it's a historical event. One close-range uppercut and the opponent's entire spine and skull get ripped clean out of their body. The headless corpse drops to the ground, and just like that, gaming grew up overnight. Here's the thing. In 1992, this didn't look like a cartoon. Midway Games used digitized graphics of real actors, actual human beings photographed and composited into the game engine. So while Street Fighter II had beautifully hand-drawn sprite art, Mortal Kombat looked like someone filmed a real murder and shoved it into an arcade cabinet. For 1992, that level of photorealism was completely unprecedented. Kids were walking up to these machines in pizza parlors and bowling alleys and watching what looked like a real person get their skeleton yanked out through their neck, which is, not ideal for the parents standing behind them, and the parents noticed. They noticed hard. The spine rip became the centerpiece of a full-blown national moral panic. Senator Joe Lieberman dragged the video game industry in front of Congress in 1993, pointing at this exact fatality as proof that games were corrupting children. The hearings were aggressive, public, and impossible to ignore. The result? The entire video game industry was forced to create a self-regulatory rating system. The ESRB was born in 1994, and every single game rating you've ever seen on a box exists because Sub-Zero ripped a spine out in an arcade. No other fatality on this list can say that. No other fatality in history can say that. But what makes the spine rip truly iconic is that it never went away. The move has been reimagined in nearly every Mortal Kombat title since the original. Each new generation of hardware gave the developers a chance to make it more detailed, more brutal, more viscerally uncomfortable. And in 2023's Mortal Kombat 1, the Cameo version of Sub-Zero performs the classic spine rip with fully modern graphics. 31 years later, and they're still pulling spines. The animation that looked disturbingly real in 1992 now looks laughably primitive, a few chunky pixels, and some red splotches. But at the time, it was the most shocking thing anyone had ever seen in a video game, and the industry literally had to restructure itself because of it. One move, one character, one arcade cabinet, and the entire landscape of gaming changed forever. But if the spine rip built Mortal Kombat's reputation, the next entry turned it into a meme before memes even existed. Here's the thing about Mortal Kombat. It's a franchise built on ripping spines out of people's bodies, decapitating your best friend on a Saturday afternoon, and watching pixelated blood rain down like confetti at the world's worst birthday party. And yet somehow, the single most recognizable moment in the entire series is a guy's face popping up in the corner of the screen and squeaking "Toasty" in a high-pitched voice. Let me explain. Back in 1993, the Mortal Kombat 2 development team had an inside joke. Sound designer Dan Forden would shout "Toasty" during playtesting sessions, and the team thought it was funny enough to immortalize. So they literally put his face in the game. During matches, completely at random, Dan Forden's head would slide into the bottom corner of the screen, deliver his little catchphrase, and then vanish. No warning, no explanation. Just a man's disembodied face appearing mid-combat while two warriors are trying to murder each other, and players lost their minds over it. Unlike every other secret in Mortal Kombat, you couldn't memorize an input sequence and trigger "Toasty" on command. It happened when it happened. This turned it into something way more powerful than a traditional Easter egg. It became a shared experience. In arcades across the country, kids would swap stories about when they'd seen it, whether certain moves triggered it more often. It was gaming's version of a cryptid sighting. "Dude, I saw the face again." "No way, what round?" But here's where it gets genuinely absurd. This random developer cameo, this throwaway joke between co-workers, somehow outlived the arcade era entirely. It outlived the 90s, it outlived the 2000s. Fortnite added a purchasable "Toasty" emote in 2025, meaning kids who weren't born until 2 decades after Mortal Kombat 2 are now doing Dan Forden impressions in a battle royale. The meme is literally older than most of the people using it, and then there's the Scorpion connection. Scorpion's fire breath fatality became colloquially known as Toasty within fan communities. Fire plus the word Toasty plus Scorpion's whole deal as the franchise's poster boy. Players started applying the label to basically any fire-based attack in the series, which means Dan Forden's silly voice clip accidentally became shorthand for an entire category of violence. The man recorded one word, and it defined 30 years of pyrotechnic finishing moves, which is, you know, a pretty solid return on investment. What makes Toasty genuinely special is the contrast. Mortal Kombat was the game that made senators hold congressional hearings. It was the reason the ESRB exists. And nestled inside all that controversy was this goofy, wholesome little Easter egg with zero violence, zero blood, and zero controversy, just a sound designer being silly. The accidental masterpiece of video game marketing, and nobody even planned it. But if Toasty represents Mortal Kombat at its most lighthearted, the next fatality on our list is the exact opposite, because Shang Tsung doesn't just kill you, he takes everything you are. Sub-Zero ripped out a spine and the world lost its mind, fair enough. But Shang Tsung did something arguably worse, and nobody even bled. His Soul Steal fatality from Mortal Kombat 2 required you to input up, down, up, low kick at close range. Simple enough. But what happened next was anything but simple. Shang Tsung removed his mask, revealed this grotesque, twisted face underneath, and then literally consumed his opponent's soul. No bones snapping, no organs hitting the floor. Just complete existential annihilation, served cold. And here's why that matters more than you think. Every fatality before Soul Steal operated on the same basic principle. Destroy the body, rip something out, burn something off, freeze and shatter. It was anatomical horror. Effective, sure, but Shang Tsung's fatality introduced something the franchise had never attempted. Conceptual horror. Your opponent didn't suffer a specific physical injury. They didn't lose a limb or a head. They lost their entire existence. Their spiritual essence was devoured by a sorcerer who looked like he genuinely enjoyed it, which is, you know, not ideal. The brilliance of Soul Steal was that it turned a finishing move into a character study. This wasn't just violence for the sake of violence. It was Shang Tsung doing exactly what Shang Tsung does in the lore. He's a shapeshifter, a soul collector, a sorcerer who derives power from consuming the essence of defeated warriors. The fatality wasn't bolted onto his character like an accessory. It was his character. And that distinction changed everything. Before Soul Steal, fatalities were interchangeable shock moments. Cool, gross, memorable, but they didn't tell you anything about who was performing them. After Soul Steal, the franchise had a new template: thematic fatalities, moves that expressed identity and narrative role rather than just finding creative new ways to separate a torso from a pelvis. Every supernatural character introduced in subsequent games owes something to this design philosophy. Ermac, Quan Chi, Shinnok, all of them got finishing moves that reflected their specific powers and mythological roles, because Shang Tsung proved that approach worked. But the real kicker is what happened decades later. In Mortal Kombat 11, Soul Steal evolved from a fatality concept into an actual gameplay mechanic. Shang Tsung could steal an opponent's soul mid-fight and gain damage buffs, plus enhanced versions of that character's moves. A visual gag from 1993 became a core combat system in 2019. That's 26 years of a single idea finding new life, which is frankly more character development than most fighting game rosters get combined. Here's the thing about Soul Steal that still gets overlooked. It's arguably more disturbing than any amount of blood. A spine rip is horrifying, but it's finite. It's over. You're dead. Soul consumption implies something worse than death. You don't just stop existing. Your very essence becomes fuel for someone else. There's no afterlife, no peace, no nothing. Just Shang Tsung getting slightly more powerful while you cease to be. I don't know what to tell you. That's existential dread in a 1993 arcade cabinet. But if you think supernatural horror is unsettling, wait until you see what happens when Kitana decides to get romantic with her opponents. Most fatalities in Mortal Kombat start with violence and end with violence. Kitana's kiss of death starts with a kiss. And that one decision made it one of the most iconic finishers the franchise has ever produced. Here's how it works. In Mortal Kombat 2, Kitana removes her mask, leans in, and plants a gentle kiss on her opponent's face. Romantic, right? Except immediately after, the victim's body begins to inflate like a grotesque human balloon, swelling larger and larger until they explode into a shower of body parts. Intimacy, then total bodily destruction. No transition, no warning, just a kiss, and then chunks. And that contradiction is exactly why it works so well. Every other fatality in the game at that point operated on a pretty simple formula. Hit them really hard, something horrible happens. Spine rip, violent from start to finish. Toasty, fire, then death. Kiss of Death broke that pattern completely by beginning with the least threatening gesture imaginable. Your brain registers tenderness for half a second before the game pulls the rug out from under you. It's not just violent, it's weird. And that weirdness is what made it stick in people's heads for 30 years. But here's where it gets interesting from a cultural standpoint. When politicians and parent groups were busy condemning Mortal Kombat for its gore, Kiss of Death was genuinely hard to categorize. You couldn't point at it and say, look at this anatomical brutality the same way you could with a spine being ripped out, because the violence was delivered through seduction and ironic inversion. The killing blow was a kiss. The destruction was a balloon pop. It was simultaneously one of the most lethal moves in the game and one of the hardest to use as ammunition in a Senate hearing, which is, not ideal if you're trying to get video games banned. There's also a layer worth acknowledging about what Kiss of Death says about Kitana as a character. She's literally weaponizing femininity. Her most dangerous attack isn't a blade or a kick, it's closeness. It's trust. Whether you read that as empowering or reductive probably says more about you than it does about the game, but either way, it complicated what a female fighting game character could be in 1993. She wasn't just there to look good between rounds. She was the one making you explode from the inside out, and the fatality has aged remarkably well, precisely because the concept scales with technology. The 1993 version was a pixelated balloon pop, funny, weird, effective. The 2023 version in MK1, renamed Last Kiss, is something else entirely. Kitana covers both faces with her fan before the kiss, and when she pulls away, the victim's skin begins to liquefy, blood oozing from every pore as their skeleton crumbles beneath melting flesh. Same concept, same contradiction, completely different level of horror. 30 years of graphical advancement turned a sight gag into body horror, and somehow both versions are equally memorable. But if you think a kiss is a strange way to kill someone, wait until you hear about the fatality that uses your own legs as a wishbone. The name alone is doing so much heavy lifting here. Make a wish. That sounds like something you'd hear at a children's charity event. Not a fatality where a shadow clone grabs your legs and rips you clean in half from the crotch up. But that's exactly what Noob Saibot delivered in Mortal Kombat 9. And it might be the single most lore-dense fatality in the entire franchise. Let me explain. Most fatalities are just cool ways to kill someone. They look brutal, they make you wince, and then you move on. But Make-A-Wish is different because the character performing it carries more narrative baggage than practically anyone else on the roster. Noob Saibot isn't just some edgy shadow ninja they cooked up to fill a slot. He's Bi-Han, the original Sub-Zero, the guy you played as in the very first Mortal Kombat. He was killed by Scorpion, dragged into the Netherrealm, and resurrected as a corrupted shadow wraith, stripped of everything that once made him human. A warrior who used to fight with ice, now fights with darkness. That's not a lateral move. That's a complete spiritual annihilation, and the fatality reflects every single layer of that transformation. When Noob performs Make-A-Wish, he summons his shadow clone, which is literally a manifestation of his corrupted soul, and the two of them each grab one of the opponent's legs. Then they pull in opposite directions, until the body splits vertically like a wishbone at Thanksgiving dinner. The violence isn't random, it's mechanically and narratively coherent with who Noob Saibot is. His shadow clone isn't a gameplay gimmick bolted onto a generic fighter. It's a physical representation of his fractured identity, a once whole person now literally split into two entities working in unison to destroy others. The fatality is his identity expressed through murder, which is poetic in a deeply upsetting way. Here's where it gets even better. The name Make-A-Wish takes an innocent childhood phrase and inverts it into something horrific. And that inversion is the entire point of Noob Saibot as a character. He's the corruption of something pure, a hero turned villain, a protector turned destroyer. Even his name is an inversion. Noob Saibot is Tobias, and Boone, spelled backward, a tribute to series creators John Tobias and Ed Boon. The character is literally built on the concept of reversal. His name is reversed, his morality is reversed, his powers are reversed, and his fatality takes the most wholesome phrase imaginable and reverses it into a reference to being torn apart by your own shadow. That level of thematic consistency across a character's name, backstory, abilities, and finishing move is genuinely rare in fighting games. Most characters get a cool fatality because it looks sick. Noob Saibot got one because it means something. The shadow clone violence isn't arbitrary. It's the logical endpoint of a tragic character arc that spans the entire franchise, from the original 1992 arcade cabinet to the 2011 reboot. Every element of Make-A-Wish, the mechanic, the name, the visual, tells you exactly who Behan became and what was taken from him. Not every fatality needs to be deep, but when one manages to be simultaneously one of the most brutal and one of the most thematically layered finishing moves in the series, that's worth talking about. But if you think narrative depth makes a fatality hit harder, wait until you see what happens when the violence is purely, uncomfortably mechanical. Most fatalities in Mortal Kombat follow a pretty simple formula. A character does something violent, the opponent dies, everyone goes home. Shinnok looked at that formula and said, "No, I think I'd like to direct a short film instead." His fatality. The grinder from Mortal Kombat X isn't one act of violence. It's a choreographed sequence of escalating destruction, and every single phase is worse than the last. It starts with two massive skeletal hands materializing out of thin air, grabbing the opponent like they're a stress toy. Then the hands twist the body violently, ripping the victim clean in half at the waist. And you'd think that would be enough, right? That's already a fatality. That's already horrifying. But Shinnok isn't done. The skeletal hands then crush both halves together, obliterating whatever's left of the torso into a wet pile of nothing. And then, as a final touch, the detached head rolls across the ground and stops right at Shinnok's feet, like an offering, which is, not ideal. Here's what separates this from basically every other fatality in the game. Shinnok doesn't move. Most characters are punching, kicking, ripping, tearing with their own hands. They're getting in there. They're doing the work. Shinnok just stands there while cosmic forces dismantle you on his behalf. He's an elder god. He doesn't fight you. He delegates your death to the universe itself and watches it happen like he's mildly bored by the whole thing. The summoned skeletal hands aren't a weapon, they're a statement. This is a being operating through metaphysical forces, not martial technique. You're not losing a fight, you're being unmade by something that considers you an inconvenience. And the animation team at NetherRealm clearly understood the assignment because every phase of this fatality received meticulous attention. The skeletal hands don't just appear, they materialize with weight and presence. The body seizure looks genuinely painful. The bisection has that sickening twist that makes your brain go, oh no, half a second before it happens. And the head roll at the end is the kind of detail that turns a good fatality into an iconic one. It's not just violence, it's composition. Now, Shinnok's only other fatality in MKX was Flick Trick, which also involves skeletal hands, because apparently that was his whole thing. A giant skeletal thumb flicking the opponent's head clean off their shoulders like a bottle cap. It's solid, it's creative, but it never generated the community discussion that the grinder did. The reason is complexity. Flick Trick is one motion, one result, one flick, one decapitation, done. The grinder is 5 distinct stages of destruction, each one building on the last, each one more elaborate and disturbing than what came before. It's the difference between a punchline and a whole joke. The setup matters, the escalation matters, and that final image of the head rolling towards Shinnok like a tribute from a lesser being, that's the part that sticks in your memory long after the match ends. It's the fatality that proved supernatural characters could outdo physical fighters in sheer creative brutality, not by hitting harder, but by barely lifting a finger. But if you think Shinnok's finishing move was a bold creative choice, wait until you see what Cassie Cage did with a cell phone. Cassie Cage's selfie fatality might be the most divisive finishing move in Mortal Kombat history. And that's exactly why it matters. Here's how it works. Cassie pulls out a nightstick and cracks her opponent across the face so hard their jaw literally detaches from their skull. Just gone, hanging by a thread of skin and muscle. And then, instead of doing anything remotely normal like walking away or acknowledging the war crime she just committed, she grabs her jawless victim by the shoulder, whips out her phone, and takes a selfie. The photo gets posted to a fictional social media platform called Friendships, a deliberate callback to the non-violent finishing moves from Mortal Kombat 2. Other MKX characters show up in the comments section reacting to the image, just casually double tapping a picture of a woman standing next to someone whose face is falling off, which is, not ideal. But here's what makes this fatality genuinely brilliant rather than just a cheap gag. Cassie Cage is the daughter of Johnny Cage and Sonya Blade. She is literally the franchise's next generation. Her Hollywood variation pulled from her dad's showboating combat style, while her Spec Ops variation leaned into her mom's military discipline. The selfie fatality isn't random, it's a character statement. This is what happens when you raise a kid in a world where ultraviolence is Tuesday and everyone has a smartphone. She doesn't see the horror, she sees content, and that's the real fourth wall break. Every other fatality in Mortal Kombat history treats violence as a spectacle for the player. You perform it, you watch it, you feel something. The selfie fatality flips that entirely. Now, the violence isn't just being observed, it's being curated and shared within the game's own fictional world. Cassie isn't performing for you, she's performing for her followers. Violence as social media content rather than combat resolution. That's a genuinely uncomfortable mirror to hold up in 2015, and the developers knew exactly what they were doing. The community reactions split almost perfectly along generational lines. Longtime fans who'd been playing since the arcade days saw it as a betrayal of everything Mortal Kombat stood for. Too much humor, not enough horror. The franchise that traumatized an entire generation of parents in 1992 was now making their kids laugh with Instagram jokes. Meanwhile, younger players embraced it as clever cultural integration, a fighting game acknowledging the world its audience actually lived in. Here's the thing though, both sides were right. The selfie fatality absolutely diluted the raw brutality that defined classic Mortal Kombat, and it absolutely represented the franchise evolving to reflect contemporary culture. Those two things aren't contradictions. They're the same observation from different emotional positions. The fatality could only exist in a very specific mid-2010s window, where selfie culture was ubiquitous enough to satirize but fresh enough to feel relevant. Try releasing that move in 2008 and nobody gets it. Try it in 2024 and it feels dated. Mortal Kombat spent decades being the thing parents were afraid of. The selfie fatality was the moment it acknowledged what it had actually become. Pop culture, not a threat, not a controversy, just another thing to post about. But if you think a selfie is a wild way to end a fight, wait until we get back to basics with a fatality that strips the franchise down to its most primal, bone-crunching roots. In 1992, Sub-Zero ripped a spine out of a pixelated body and nearly got video games banned. 23 years later, he did basically the same thing, except this time you could count the individual vertebrae. And honestly, it hit even harder. The head rip, classic fatality in Mortal Kombat X, is exactly what it sounds like. Sub-Zero grabs his opponent at close range and tears their entire head clean off their body. No spine this time, just a clean separation of head from neck with all the realistic tissue stretching, cervical detachment, and gravity-affected head drop that 2015 motion capture technology could deliver. It's brutal, it's efficient, and it's a direct love letter to the move that started everything. But here's what makes this one special. MKX didn't just include legacy fatalities as bonus content, they formalized them. The game introduced the classic fatality designation, a specific category for returning finishing moves from earlier games that had been rebuilt from scratch with contemporary graphics and animation. That's not just nostalgia. That's the developers looking at their own history and saying, yeah, these are museum pieces. Let's put them in a new frame. And the comparison is genuinely staggering. The original spine rip was a handful of digitized frames, maybe 6 or 7 total, showing a vaguely human shape yanking a red and white blob from another vaguely human shape. It was shocking in 1992 because nothing like it existed. The head rip in MKX features full skeletal animation, realistic neck physics, tendons visibly snapping, same concept, same character. 23 years of technological evolution separating them. It's like comparing a cave painting of a bison to a 4K nature documentary. Both technically depict the same animal, but one of them makes you feel things you didn't sign up for. There's also a genuinely interesting identity question buried in this fatality that most players never think about. Which Sub-Zero is actually performing it? Because Sub-Zero isn't one character, he's two. The original, Baihan, debuted in 1992 and performed that first spine rip in the arcade, but Baihan got killed by Scorpion and was resurrected as Noob Saibo, a shadow wraith with zero interest in ice-based violence. His younger brother, Kuai Liang, took over the Sub-Zero identity starting in Mortal Kombat 2 and has been the primary Sub-Zero for the vast majority of the franchise's existence. So the MKX head rip is Kuai Liang performing a classic callback to a move his dead brother originated, which is either a touching tribute or identity theft. I don't know what to tell you. The 2023 reboot made things even more complicated by flipping the script entirely. Bihan returned as Sub-Zero, while Kuai Liang was reimagined as Scorpion, essentially swapping the two brothers' franchise roles after 30 years. So now the original Sub-Zero is back, but the classic fatality designation was built for a game where his brother held the title. The move has outlived, outgrown, and transcended both of the men who performed it. That's the real achievement of the head rip. It's not just a fatality, it's a time capsule. Every time you input that command, you're watching the entire history of video game graphics compressed into a single act of violence. A pixelated blob became a cinematic execution, and the franchise was self-aware enough to label it exactly what it was: a classic, reimagined. But if you think honoring legacy characters is impressive, wait until you see what happens when a completely different franchise crashes the party. Here's a character whose entire philosophy is "I believe in peace. No matter how many men, women, and children I have to kill to get it." And somebody at NetherRealm heard that and said, yeah, put him in Mortal Kombat. Which is, a perfect fit. Peacemaker dropped into Mortal Kombat 1 as DLC in February 2024, and he immediately felt different from every other fighter on the roster. Not just aesthetically, but mechanically. His moveset didn't rely on martial arts or supernatural powers. He had a pistol for projectiles. He had his chrome helmet for ramming attacks. He had force field generation, and he had Eagly, his trained eagle companion, functioning as both an offensive weapon and an assistive tool during combat. The man literally brought a bird to a fistfight, and it worked. His fatalities leaned into this absurdity with complete commitment, integrated his firearms and armor technology into a finishing sequence that felt ripped straight out of his DC characterization. His second fatality did the same thing from a different angle. Both of them incorporated Eagly, because of course they did. You can't have Peacemaker without the eagle. That's like having Scorpion without the spear. And here's the thing, neither fatality felt like a generic fighting game kill with a Peacemaker skin slapped on top. They felt like something Christopher Smith would actually do, which is simultaneously hilarious and horrifying. But Peacemaker represents something bigger than just a fun DLC character. He's the culmination of a strategy that Mortal Kombat has been building for years. It started back in MKX with Jason Voorhees and Predator showing up as guest fighters. Cool additions, sure, but they were horror icons. They made sense in a violent fighting game. Then MK1 blew the doors wide open. Homelander from The Boys, Conan the Barbarian, Ghostface from Scream, multiple DC properties. Suddenly, Mortal Kombat wasn't just a fighting game anymore. It was a cross-media collision platform where literally anyone could fight anyone. And that's the ultimate flex. Mortal Kombat didn't go to these franchises. These franchises came to it. The brand became so culturally dominant that getting your character into MK became a stamp of legitimacy. You want your violent anti-hero to be taken seriously? Drop him into the roster and let him rip someone's spine out. Peacemaker walking into this arena felt less like a crossover and more like a homecoming. A guy whose entire identity revolves around peace through extreme violence, entering the single most violent franchise in gaming history. I don't know what to tell you. It's poetic. And if you zoom out far enough, the journey from where Fatalities started to where they are now is genuinely staggering. In 1992, Sub-Zero ripped out a pixelated spine in a Chicago arcade cabinet, and senators lost their minds. It was a handful of sprites, a few frames of animation. The entire controversy that birthed the ESRB rating system came from something that, by today's standards, looks like a flip book drawn by a particularly disturbed middle schooler. Now, in 2024, a DC Universe superheroes trained eagle is participating in cinematic fatality sequences rendered in 4K at 60 frames per second, and nobody bats an eye. That's not just technological evolution, that's cultural evolution. Mortal Kombat didn't just survive the controversy. It didn't just outlast the politicians who tried to shut it down. It became the thing they were afraid it would become, and the world decided that was fine, actual better than fine. The world decided it was entertaining, from one spine rip in a 1992 arcade to cross-universe cinematic kills, featuring DC superheroes and their pet eagles in 2024, 32 years of fatalities. Every single one of them earned. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.